Hi there, students. This is Brian, and this is a little writing video about rhetorical patterns. Now, just like in other videos, I want to talk a little bit before about what the main point is in for these kind of things. Rhetorical patterns are just, in a way, a fancy way of saying that this essay or this paragraph is going to be written in a specific style and is going to have some specific goals, all right? We in the writing classes here, we focus on specific rhetorical patterns, not because that's the only way you can write. In fact, if you have a book or something like that, you're probably going to employ many different rhetorical patterns through the course of your thesis. Maybe one paragraph is going to be classification and another one might be argumentative. It depends, but when it comes to writing for the class of academic writing, we want you to focus a little bit on each rhetorical pattern so you get an idea about some of the techniques that are involved in writing that pattern in a good way. That way, when you go into other classes where you might be asked to write a longer work or something that's asking you to do something with several goals, like define something and persuade somebody of your opinion, where you might have to use several different rhetorical patterns, you'll be able to do those in a good way, in a focused way, all right? Very rarely, actually, when you get into other classes, are you going to write just one essay using one rhetorical pattern. When you write longer works, you're going to be using several different rhetorical patterns depending on what your context requires, okay? So keep that in mind. A rhetorical pattern is just a way to write something, and each pattern has specific goals that you're going to try to achieve throughout it. That's the main thing, has specific goals. Longer things that you write, we're going to have several different goals, but in this thing, when we ask you to write a paragraph or an essay in a specific rhetorical pattern, basically that means that we're giving you a specific goal or a specific question, and we want you to answer that in a very concise manner, okay? So let's move on quickly to the question of why focus on these things. And again, it's just so that you will get that extra practice, so that you will, when you go on to dealing with more complex topics, you're not going to be confused about, well, what's my job here and what's my job here, all right? So let's talk briefly about the different kinds of rhetorical patterns that we have in writing class and what each one of their goals are. This is by far not all of the different kinds of patterns there are. There are many different ones, but these are some of the most important. The first pattern is the narrative pattern. This basically has the goal of telling a story in a clear and even entertaining way, all right? So with the narrative pattern, you're going to try to set the stage of the thing, tell the story of maybe an event that happened or something in history, and give a little point about why it was important, okay? That's the main thing with narrative. Tell a story in a descriptive and interesting way. Okay, that's the first pattern. The second pattern that we often deal with is process or process analysis. The goal here is to show somebody how something works, or how something was put together, or how you do something. The main thing is the steps in a process, all right? And you want the reader, by the end, to be able to read your essay or your paragraph and have a clear idea about how to do it, so that if they wanted to replicate it, if they wanted to do it on their own, they would understand how to do it just from using your paragraph, okay? That's the second type. The third type is a classification type, and this basically means taking some phenomenon or something and put it into some classification. Talking about people, how many different classifications can you put in for people, or computers, or books, or music? How can you divide these topics up into logical divisions, all right? And the goal of it is just so that people can read it and have a good idea that you understand the thing, and that thing has 3, maybe 4 important elements. Give it that classification so that person can understand the different ways something can be divided up or identified for the reader. Okay, so that's the third one, the classification. The fourth is compare or contrast. This is a way that the goal of this is to show how two things are similar. It could be 2 or more things, but usually just 2 things are similar to each other or dissimilar. Like, how are these 2 books similar to one another or different from one another? You might even combine them. You might write a whole essay in which you say, in some ways, this book is similar to that book, but in other ways, it's different from the other book. So this is very important for you to show, to be able to think logically about how things are different or similar from one another. And sometimes it's surprising. You might take two presidential candidates and find out that actually, even though they're in opposition, they have many things that make them alike. All right? So that's the fourth one, compare contrast. The fifth one is cause or effect. And here, this is where you try to analyze and show the reader all of the causes that led up to something happen. You take some kind of event, like maybe the invention of the iPhone. What are all the things, the causes that led up to that? Well, people wanted to have a phone that could also be like a computer, or people wanted to have something that they could listen to music on. Or maybe different events. So you try to talk about all the things that caused a certain event to happen. And the effect is the other side. What are all the things that were the result of that? Well, what's the result of, say, the iPhone being invented? Well, there's a whole new category of phones. People now are more able to get online, check their email, whatever. Maybe there's positive effects, negative effects. You have to try to show those different effects in a very logical, clear way. And you want to even think about maybe the relationship between classification and cause effect. You might be classifying some of those effects into different kinds of maybe positive, negative, and so on. There's some relationship sometimes between the rhetorical patterns. But the main thing with cause and effect is show why something happened and what's the effect of it afterwards, okay? And the final rhetorical pattern we have is argumentative or persuasive. And the simple goal here is to convince somebody of your point of view. You believe something strongly, how can you convince other people of your point of view? You might really believe that the death penalty should be abolished. Well, what kind of arguments can you use to prove your point? And by the end of the reader having read your paper, hopefully they will be persuaded by you. And if they're not, then you really haven't succeeded in your goal of persuading them. Obviously, sometimes it's very difficult to change somebody's mind, but that's your goal. You want them to take your point of view and feel that you've thought it through very carefully, and here are some logical arguments against it. Okay? That's it. So those are different rhetorical patterns. I hope that this video helps you get an idea about what the goals of each one are. You might want to refer back to this video as we go through the class just to remind yourself of the goals. And that's it. And the challenge, if you can just come up to me and tell me about which one of these patterns you feel is the easiest, the one that you feel that is going to be the most easy for you to achieve the goals on. Okay, that's it. Talk to you soon.